Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Planning Applications Committee meeting on tonight, the 16th of April 2024. I'll start with the evacuation procedure. I notice there's a lot of new faces here. So can I ask that you ensure that you are signed in on the signing sheet provided. These will be used in case of an evacuation. A fire drill is not expected, so if the alarm sounds, please evacuate the building quickly and calmly. Please use the stairs and do not use the lifts. Once out of the building, please gather outside of the Lloyds Bank building on the opposite side of the road. Exit by the door by which you entered the room or by the fire exits which are clearly indicated by the standard green fire exit signs. If you need any assistance in evacuating the building, please make yourself known to a member of staff. This meeting is being recorded for future publication on the Council's website. Please can I ask that you turn your mobile phones to either silent or turn them off for the duration of this meeting. Okay, before I move on to item number 2, just a very brief announcement. Last meeting that we held, we didn't get through didn't get beyond our first item of business. Sadly, Maria took a bit of a tumble, who is one of our officers. I'm very pleased to report that she is improving. She is home now, and hopefully we'll see her back at work in the next few weeks. A bunch of flowers has been sent out on behalf of the Planning Applications Committee, wishing her a very speedy recovery. So it's nice to have that as some good news. Item 2, apologies. I have 2 apologies from Councillor Jay Shepherd and Councillor Shires. Does anyone else know of any other apologies? No, I think we've got everyone else here. Minutes. Hopefully you've all had a chance to look at the minutes from the previous meeting on the 19th of March. Does anyone have any reason why I can't sign those off? No, looking around, so the members are indicating they're happy for me to sign those off. To Kelly, please. Thank you. Okay, item number 4, declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations that are not already stated on the schedule? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to planning application number 3, the Vicarage Street site, I should declare that I am the portfolio holder for Business and Regeneration and leader of the Council, in which capacity I have had meetings about the policy. I have had no such meetings, however, about the individual planning application with officers and haven't expressed a view one way or the other on the merits or otherwise of the particular planning application.
Okay, thank you. Any other members? Councillor Hartshorn.
Thank you, Chair. It should be made aware that I am a former employee of the library that is currently proposed for demolition in the application number 3.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any others, so I should go to declarations of contact. Do any members have any declarations of contact? Councillor Markham.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As a local councillor, I was actually one of the councillors who called item 1 in, which is the Woodlands application. And apart from that, I think we've all had emails from various people with reference to the application. And today I've actually had contact with a resident, but I didn't indicate which way I would vote. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the 2 people we've had contact are from Mr. Carl Mayer and from Councillor Evans, and that was from the previous meeting. Councillor Wilson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As printed in the minutes from the previous meeting where we were anticipating being able to dispose of the application, I had a meeting with Arbury Estates, Mr. Weaver, 18 months, 2 years ago, about various proposed planning applications, but there was no indication of how we would intend to vote. It was him basically giving a presentation to us, and officers were present and were comfortable in saying that we hadn't breached any impartiality rules.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any other members indicating, so with that in mind, we'll move to the first item. Rebecca, whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Chair. Item number 1 is a hybrid planning application which seeks full planning permission for the demolition of the existing Woodlands farmhouse and agricultural buildings and outline planning permission for up to 150 dwellings. Access is a consideration at this stage. However, layout, scale, appearance and landscaping would be considered at a future reserved matters stage. Objections have been received as detailed on the agenda and addendum. The site forms part of the HSG4 Woodlands housing allocation and is located to the west of Woodlands Road and Woodlands Lane and to the north of the Nook local wildlife site, and comprises of farmland and a farmhouse. Existing residential dwellings are present to the north and west of the site. The key issues to consider in the assessment of this application are the principle of development, affordable housing and housing mix, visual amenity and landscape character, residential amenity, highway safety and accessibility, flood risk and drainage, contamination, land stability and air quality, ecology, open space and biodiversity, heritage and archaeology, and planning obligations. In terms of the principle of development, the site forms part of the Strategic Housing Allocation HSG4. HSG4 is allocated within policy DS5 of the 2019 Borough Plan and sets out provision for approximately 689 dwellings, a local centre, parks and play facilities and a primary school. The allocated area is split into an eastern and western parcel with Woodlands Road and Woodlands Lane running through the centre. The site sits within the western half of the allocation. Most of the site is within the settlement boundary except for the vehicle access. However, this was discussed at pre-application stage where it was considered necessary for highway visibility and to protect some of the larger trees. Subject to this being the only form of development outside the assessment boundary, planning policy have no objection. The Borough Plan states that residential development should be within 1,200 metres walking distance of a designated district or local centre, and where new residential development is proposed and the above thresholds cannot be demonstrated, the application should include the provision of a new centre. This is why the inclusion of a community hub as a key development principle for the HSG allocation was necessary, because the distance between parts of the wider allocation to existing services exceeded this threshold in certain parts. The application initially sought outline consent for a community hub. However, this was later omitted from the description of development as Highways advised that this would require the inclusion of a secondary access. The ideal location for the community hub, as shown in the HSG4 concept plan SPD, was within the western part of the site boundary for this application. As such, the parcel of land earmarked for the community hub has been removed from the site plan so that it is still potentially able to be brought forward as a community hub within the ideal location as part of a future phase. As the hub would no longer be brought forward within this first phase, it should be ensured that the scheme is suitable and sustainable should the remainder of the allocation not materialise. The large majority of this application site is within the 1,200 metres walking distance of either the Smorrel Lane and the Nuneaton Road local centres. These centres are shown in yellow on the plan that's on the screen. The northernmost part of the site is the furthest from these centres, with the maximum distance being approximately 1,250 metres. However, this additional 50 metres is not considered to be significant enough as to warrant a refusal, especially given that the large majority of the site is within the 1,200 metres of an existing centre, and the exact location of the proposed dwellings is not being set, with this being an outline application. Whilst not a designated centre, there are also existing convenience stores and a doctor's surgery on the corner of Woodlands Road and Newtown Road, as shown in red on the plan. Existing bus stops are shown in blue and Bedworth Town Centre in green. A number of objections have been received during the course of the application relating to the Borough Plan review and the proposed deallocation of the HSG4 site, and concerns that the housing requirements set within the 2019 Borough Plan are based on out-of-date and inaccurate census data. The Borough Plan review was submitted to the Secretary of State on the 12th of February 2024, however it has not been examined. As part of the review, it is proposed that HSG4 is to be deallocated. This is because the site was identified as not being deliverable within the plan period. At the time, no planning application or pre-application discussions had taken place, and there were no indications that an application may be forthcoming. However, the situation has clearly changed since then. Consideration has been given to the impacts of the Borough Plan review, which proposes to deallocate the site. However, it's considered that the proposed deallocation of the site can only be afforded limited weight in the decision-making process, and the current Borough Plan carries greater weight. Policy H2 of the Borough Plan requires 25% of all new developments to be affordable on sites of 15 dwellings or more. The submitted planning statement sets out that the scheme will provide the 25% affordable housing, and this will be secured through a Section 106 agreement. The proposed precise tenure splits would be confirmed at the reserve matters stage, where the number of proposed units is known. In terms of market housing, a detailed housing mix based on a detailed layout plan would form part of a subsequent reserve matters application, and an assessment would be carried out at that time to ensure compliance with planning policy. In relation to visual amenity and landscape character, the proposal would evidently have an impact on the landscape character of the area. However, its impact is not considered to be significant to warrant a refusal of outline planning permission, and the acceptability of the proposed house types, the scale, appearance and layout of the scheme would all be matters to assess at the relevant reserve matters stage. It should also be recognised that the site is part of an allocated site within the 2019 Borough Plan, and whilst its future development in line with policy HSG4 would inevitably have some impact on the landscape character of the area, the benefits associated with the proposed development must also be taken into consideration. Any future reserve matters applications should demonstrate how they meet the form of development principles set out in policy HSG4. In terms of residential amenity, a noise assessment has been submitted to support the application. MBBC Environmental Health have reviewed the findings, which identified some elevated noise arising from the A444 which may require mitigation. Condition 21 has been included to secure a noise attenuation scheme, including glazing and ventilation details. As this is an outline application, the layout is not being considered, and any future reserve matters application would need to ensure that the distance standards are met in relation to the existing properties and within the site itself. The house types will all need to comply with the nationally described space standards, and all plots will need to have sufficient private amenity space. Such matters would be addressed at the relevant reserved matters stage. Turning to highway safety, access is proposed from the Woodlands Lane in between number 184 Woodlands Lane and 1 Dove Close. The proposed access has been widened to 6.7 metres in width to accommodate buses, and tracking drawings have been provided to show safe manoeuvrability for larger vehicles. Warwickshire County Council Highways have no objections, subject to conditions and a Section 106 legal agreement to secure various financial contributions. The impact of potential vehicle movements associated with the proposed development on the public highway network has been addressed. Traffic modelling has been carried out on the Newtown Road, Croft Road, Heath Road and A444 slip roads. This shows that the development would have a marginal impact on the highway network. However, there is already excessive queuing and delays, and therefore the overall impact would be severe. In order to mitigate against the impacts of the development, the developer suggested the implementation of MOVA control signals at the Newtown Road traffic lights and a keep clear box at the Heath Road junction. County Highways have reviewed this and conclude that with the proposed mitigation, the impact of the development would be acceptable and would actually provide an additional capacity when compared to the baseline scenario. The NPPF outlines the need for planning to promote walking, cycling and public transport and to make the fullest possible use of these, and also states that growth should be focused on locations which are or can be made sustainable. The nearest bus stops are situated on Newtown Road, approximately 0.6 miles from the proposed site access on Woodlands Lane. These services provide connections to Bedworth, Coventry and Nuneaton, and the access has been designed in order to allow for bus access. County Highways have requested a condition for the submission of details for bus infrastructure alongside future reserve matters applications. Should local bus services not wish to extend their services to access the site, demand responsive transport would be provided. Section 106 contributions would be provided to fund this demand responsive transport service and or to extend existing public bus services. This approach ensures that the site would still be served by some form of a bus service should existing service providers not wish to extend their services. The inclusion of footpaths and cycle paths would be addressed at reserve matter stage to ensure suitable and sustainable connectivity. In relation to flood risk and drainage, the site is within flood zone 1 with areas of 2 and 3. The Environment Agency have no objections to the proposal, as the proposed dwellings could be sited wholly within flood zone 1. Environment Agency mapping has indicated that parts of the site, most notably along field drainage ditch lines, have higher risk of surface water flooding. In order to ensure that the site remains at low risk of flooding and does not increase the risk of flooding elsewhere, the HSG4 SPD states that any development should include a comprehensive sustainable drainage system scheme. The developer has provided a flood risk assessment and a sustainable drainage strategy, which includes the use of detenuation basins, swales and permeable paving. The site has been split into 3 catchment areas, which would discharge into 3 ponds. County Flood Risk Management have reviewed this information and have no objection, subject to conditions. The developer undertook a developer inquiry with Severn Trent prior to the submission of this planning application. The developer inquiry response from Severn Trent stated that they wouldn't allow connections to the closest foul sewer on Woodlands Road. However, there is a foul sewer on Nuneaton Road with more than sufficient capacity to accommodate this proposal. Land contamination assessment has been submitted, and Environmental Health have confirmed that they're satisfied with the findings, but have requested additional surveying around the farmhouse and agricultural buildings, and this has been covered within Condition 10. An air quality impact assessment has also been submitted, and MBBC Environmental Health are satisfied with the findings of the assessment and have stated that the impacts to air quality would be negligible. Subsequently, they have no objection, subject to conditions covering a dust management plan, the provision of electric vehicle charging points, and that all gas-fired boiler installations should be a specified standard, which are covered in conditions 8, 30 and 33. With regard to ecology, open space and biodiversity, an ecological assessment has been submitted to support the application. This also included habitat and species surveys. The surveys show that there are suitable habitats on site for great crested newts, bats, hedgehogs and birds, and the assessment outlines measures to be taken to ensure the protection of these species. The Parks team accept the findings of the ecological assessment and have no objections to this element of the proposal, subject to conditions. There are multiple trees and groups of trees on the site, and the proposal would see the removal of 9 trees or groups of trees. It would be ensured at reserve matters stage that new tree planting will be undertaken within the site following development to mitigate the loss of any trees, and that suitable buffer zones are included between existing retained trees and the proposed development. The Parks team do currently object to this application for the reasons listed within the agenda. However, the majority of the matters raised would be addressed at the reserve matters stage. Whilst indicative at this outline stage, the framework master plan shows large areas of open space to the southern and central parts of the site, along with 3 play areas and buffering around existing water features. Any further details will be covered under the landscaping and layout reserve matters. With regard to biodiversity, the impact is treated sequentially, with avoidance being the preferred method, followed by on-site mitigation, then off-site mitigation, and finally monetary contributions. While some on-site mitigation would be provided, and again in hedgerow and watercourse units has been shown, the calculations do show a loss of 39 habitat units. In order to compensate for this, an off-site habitat creation area would be provided within the Arbory estate. A technical note has been provided to show that this could create 90 units. The Parks team raised concerns that there was a lack of supporting information for the on- and off-site biodiversity mitigation proposals. However, the 90 units suitably mitigates for the loss of the 39 and provides an overall gain of 51 units. This is considered to provide a sufficient buffer to ensure that there's no overall net loss in biodiversity. Further details would be requested via condition, and the gain would be secured within the Section 106 agreement. And the wording for these conditions and those relating to species protection have been agreed with the Parks team. There are no designated heritage assets within the site. However, the Woodlands farmhouse may be considered as a non-designated heritage asset due to its age and features. The Victorian Society could consider the farmhouse to feature numerous 19th century details, and therefore they object to the proposed demolition of the building. Planning Policy have reviewed the farmhouse as part of their processes to comprise a list of buildings which are worth locally listing and consider that the building does not warrant a locally listed status. Whilst the objection from the Victorian Society does carry some weight against the application, the demolition of the buildings would be permitted development subject to a prior notification application. In a prior notification application, the only consideration would be the principle of the demolition, would be the method of demolition rather than the principle of the demolition. There are extensive areas of ridge and furrow within the HSG4 allocation, and areas of high quality ridge and furrow have been identified on this site. Whilst indicative in nature, the proposed concept plan shows the majority of this ridge and furrow can be retained as informal open space. With regard to archaeology, evaluative field work and trial trenching has been undertaken across the site. The trial trenching identified a number of linear features and pottery fragments. The county archaeology team have reviewed the findings of the field work and have no objection. In relation to planning obligations, a number of contributions have been requested for things such as education, play and open space, highways mitigation, sports provision, healthcare and public transport. The applicant has agreed to these contributions. Paragraph 38 of the NPPF states that local planning authorities should approach decisions on proposed development in a positive and creative way. They should use the full range of planning tools available and work proactively with applicants to secure developments that will improve the economic, social and environmental conditions of the area. Decision makers at every level should seek to approve applications for sustainable development where possible. In conclusion, the site is currently allocated for residential development within the adopted plan. The scheme would provide a significant number of affordable properties, improved connectivity and public transport, and provide play and open space facilities. Whilst not on site, there would be an overall gain in biodiversity as part of improvements within the wider Arbury estate, and the scheme broadly complies with the HSG4 concept plan. Whilst it is proposed to deallocate the site as part of the Borough Plan review, this has not yet been examined by the Planning Inspectorate, and until adopted, the current 2019 Borough Plan is considered to carry more weight. As such, the recommendation is one of approval, subject to the conditions and the completion of a legal agreement. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Rebecca. I now have a number of speakers on this item, so I'll go with the first of those. That's Mr. Carl Mayer. So, Mr. Mayer, when you're ready, you have your 3 minutes.
Tonight is the opportunity to put this application once and for all in the bin. This application should never have been put in the local plan in the first place. It seems it's only been put in by the previous Labour administration because of their ludicrous decision to accept an overspill of 4,000 houses from Coventry City Council's apparent unmet housing need from their local plan. This has since been proven beyond doubt by the ONS and census to be flawed, thanks to the population growth figures used by Coventry in their local plan being 27% overinflated. This site has also been removed by this council in its plan review that is currently being looked at by the Planning Inspectorate, meaning a vote for approval tonight would go totally against emerging council policy, which in turn would make this council look crazy to the taxpayers of the borough, given the time, money and effort spent by officers in the local plan review. Flooding is dangerous on this site, and no documents I have seen in this application from the developer have addressed its regards flood risk and safe surface water drainage. How will it pan out when the fields and ditches are replaced by tarmac and concrete? The proposed balancing lakes will obviously, if full, discharge into the River Sow, turning the Children's Memorial Garden and the Nuneaton Nature Reserve into one huge flood, which is a massive existing problem now. The River Sow has got much worse in recent years since the building of the Astley Fields estate 500 yards upstream, resulting in the Newt resembling New Orleans in heavy rainfall. This site should be looked at with a sequential test against other sites if required, for safety reasons, and to do so would be not to do so would be reckless. In October last year, an appeal for development 200 metres away from this site was heard by an inspector, which resulted in some very interesting points in his report. When refusing the developer's appeal, I have emailed this to the members of the committee in full, but I would like to make a couple of points tonight. This application is in breach of council policy, Part 1, Policy TC3, with the site being 400 metres higher than the guideline of 1,200 metres for walking distance to local shops, which according to the inspector was Smorrel Lane shops, which is clearly 1,600 metres away from the application site entrance. Surely council policy should be adhered to for fair planning balance. With the other landowner of HSG4 allegedly washing the hands of the site due to sustainability costs, it begs the question of the concept plan being flawed. Their land was going to be used for a school and an A444 North Slip Road, which would still have to get past a hearing regards the Roads Traffic Act. It is quite obvious this site is unsustainable in many ways and just adds to existing problems within the area regarding flooding and traffic, and this application should be refused. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I just ask, do any members have any points of clarification they'd like to ask? Okay, no. So I'll move on to our next speaker then, which is Ms. Lou Parker. So when you're ready, Ms. Parker, you've got your 3 minutes.
Thank you. Honourable committee members, the projected figures for required housing in the area were arrived at during a collaboration between a previous administration and Coventry City Council. These figures have now been proven to be vastly overestimated, and as such the number of houses suggested are not needed. Additionally, the current land supply figure is well above 5. I would respectfully suggest that recent developments that have almost doubled the size of Bulkington, the proposed development at Hospital Lane and various other sites would be more than enough to meet the true housing demand. The developer has requested planning permission in the area, knowing full well that the woodlands is soon to be removed from the borough plan, with the revised plan awaiting ratification. North Warwickshire MP Mr Craig Tracy is aware of this situation and has been involved with attempting to appeal to the developer's better nature to stop the application. The land itself is good quality arable land that has been successfully farmed by a tenant farmer and family for many, many years. The land is the last green space in the Bedworth area, which is accessible via a public footpath. It is the government's policy not to build on green space. If this permission is given, it will fly in the face of government and local council policy and will see the end of the Bedworth woodlands as we know it. The access to this proposed development could not be in a more dangerous and unsuitable place on a bad bend in Woodlands Road, which is already at full traffic capacity. The woodlands is a well-documented area that floods significantly, as per the findings of His Majesty's Inspector at a recent appeal hearing on the 31st of October and 1st of November 23. The Nuke has publicly accessed footpaths and already floods to dangerous levels in times of heavy rain. Recent images were shared with local councillors. It is well documented that a full emergency search and rescue response was initiated in recent floods when a gentleman sadly died having been caught in the fast-flowing floodwater here. The proposed development would prevent the current acreage draining normally, and the runoff would bring further flooding to the Nuke. It is suggested by persons with knowledge of civil engineering that additional flooding in the Nuke could have a knock-on effect and lead to flooding in other areas of Bedworth. Woodlands Lane, near to the junction with Dove Close and beyond towards Astley, floods regularly, making the lane impassable, with formal road closures becoming a common occurrence. During such times, this would see an additional daily burden of 300 to 450 vehicles from the new development travelling along Woodlands Road towards Bedworth. The recent closures for the development of Cartwrights, involving only 9 houses, raise serious doubts about the feasibility of additional necessary road closures to accommodate the construction of an additional 150 dwellings here, with the safety, accessibility and quality of life of current residents at stake. At certain times of day, it can take anything up to 20 minutes to get out of Old Newtown Road onto Heath Road, with volume queuing back to Woodlands Working Men's Club, and this would be exacerbated. In a recent hearing with His Majesty's Planning Inspector, Mr Jonathan Edwards found Woodlands area was unsuitable for development, not least of all for lack of amenities including schools, play areas and shops. As this development is only 200 metres from that previous one and nothing has changed, the same rules should apply as per policy TC3 of the Borough Plan. Granting of this permission would spell the beginning of the end of Bedworth Woodlands and be in direct contravention of government and local council policy. I therefore respectfully urge the committee to consider the unsuitability of this location and reject this application, thereby protecting a much-loved local green space. Thank you for your attention and consideration.
Thank you very much, Ms Parker. Do any members have any points of clarification they'd like to seek from Ms Parker? Councillor Markham.
I'd just like to ask one question. The Woodlands Lane, you say that it floods regularly. How often has it flooded in the last 12 months where it's been impassable and it's been closed?
We've actually got a running log of the amounts of floods because they're so significant. But actually, since the start of this year, it has been flooded as much as it has not been flooded, to the extent where at one point it was flooded and impassable unless you've got a 4x4 or you're really foolhardy. We've actually got drone footage, which if you look at it, it looks like an actual river. And there was another formal road closure on Woodlands Road, which meant that people couldn't get out of Dove Close. And when the residents of Dove Close contacted the council to find out and to say, could you please move the closure, the council weren't aware of it because it was a private contractor. So that the flooding is horrendous, and it's more of a regular thing than not. It's something we've come to live with. Our house actually fronts onto the floods. I live with it. I've lived with it for 22 years, and it is much worse now than it has ever been. And interestingly, just as an anecdote, I spoke to the farmer who farms the land 3 days ago, and we were stood looking at his fields, and he said in all the time the family have been farming there, and he's been farming there, he can't believe how wet it is now, because with climate change, we're just getting more and more water. It's saturating, and it's to the point where it has nowhere to go. So any further building will just exacerbate the flooding in the lane and the flooding on the area that the proposed development sits.
Okay, thank you very much for those comments. Thank you for the question, Councillor Markham. I'll go to our next speaker, and that's Mr. James Byrne, who is the transport consultant. So, Mr. Byrne, you have 3 minutes when you're ready.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me time to speak tonight to the committee on the proposed scheme at Woodlands, Bedworth, on behalf of the applicant. Oh, sorry, do you want me to speak close to the microphone? Sorry, is that better? Sorry. Beg your pardon. Sorry, I'll start from the beginning, sorry. Thank you for giving me the time to speak tonight to the committee and the proposed scheme at Woodlands Lane on Bedworth on behalf of the applicant. My name's Jim Byrne. I work for Mode Transport Planning, and we're a private transport planning consultancy who specialise in providing a range of transport planning services to developers, planners, landowners regarding a range of developments. My involvement on this site has specifically been with respect to transport and highways matters. Following the allocation of the wider HSG4 site, Mode was approached by Savills and the Arbury Estate in 2022 to review the site on the basis of putting a formal planning application together for submission to MBBC. As part of the initial stage of works, we undertook a detailed due diligence review of the site in terms of site observations, historical information, the work submitted at EIP, and the wider HSG4 SBD document that sits alongside the scheme to help delivery. The wider HSG4 parcel comprises of multiple landowners, but in terms of this application, the eastern parcel has not been in a position to take forward as part of this application. Therefore, only the western parcel in the ownership of the Arbury Estate can come forward at this time. This wider land holding on the western side could provide circa 350 to 400 dwellings, half the total of HSG4, but for reasons of current limitations on the accesses as defined in the HSG4 SBD, the number of units that can access from a single point of access has been limited to 150 dwellings in line with Warwickshire Design Guide guidance. However, the scheme, access design, location and layout has been provided so as not to prejudice the remainder of the allocation on either side of Woodlands Lane or Road from coming forward in the future, if so, in the future. Following the pre-applications discussions held with in September 22 with WCC as the local highway authority and National Highways, given the location of the M6, where the assessment methodologies, the use of the panoramics model, were to be used in the subsequent highways works, were agreed and accepted by all parties. The parameters, methodologies were all consistent with those at EIP in the allocation stage and other schemes within Warwickshire to provide a comparable base to provide a review of the scheme. The panoramics model is a strategic transport model that includes all known committed development infrastructure within the area for 2031 for the future year period. A detailed review of that model did not highlight any junctions that would need to be reviewed in detail, with the exception of the M6, Junction 3, which has its own scheme devised. However, given the proximity of the site and the residents' concerns, we provided a detailed review of the site access junction and the Heath Road, Newtown Road crossroads with the 444 slip roads to the south of the site. No issues were identified as part of that subsequent modelling work. However, at the request of WCC, a bespoke model was built of that junction with a sensitivity test, and mitigation was provided to achieve a nil detriment position, which included markings and MOVA. With regards to the scheme as a whole, no highway safety issues were identified from the data provided from Warwickshire County Council. The site access has been designed against the adopted Warwickshire Design Guide at agreed parameters and widths. Road safety audit was completed to the satisfaction of WCC, and no issues remain. No capacity concerns remain either. A number of 106 conditions overall, the scheme has been subject to a very rigorous assessment using approved methodology and parameters. Have resulted in no significant impact on highways, safety or operation.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Byrne. Do any members have any points of clarification they wish to seek? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure whether this is for Mr. Byrne or whether it's for officers, but I'll be guided accordingly. If I remember the Borough Plan 2019 correctly, and it is 5 years ago, Chair, the inspector said that for HSG4 to go ahead and for it to be deemed sound, that it had to have a slip road onto the treble 4. If I am reading the application correctly, that isn't proposed with what you are putting forward tonight. Why is it, based on what you've said, that you believe it meets all the criteria? Why at this point doesn't it need the slip road, whereas the inspector said for HSG4 to be sound, there should be that slip road onto the treble 4? I'm slightly confused. It may be something for the officers, Chair, but I thought, seeing as he's a transport consultant, he might be able to give an explanation.
I'm happy to allow that. Thank you, Councillor Wilson. I don't know, Mr Byrne, if you want to have a go, and then I don't know if officers will have their own version. So,
No, I mean, purely from a highways perspective. So in terms of the previous EIP work, I think there was a question asked to the inspector at the time, at what point the trigger is for the 444 to kick in that slip road, at what point that is needed to facilitate a threshold of housing out of the wider 6, 8, 9 number of units. As part of the work at that time, I think the threshold test was, 170 units, I think was the threshold limit, at which point the 444 needs to kick in. So that was what was said previously back at the EIP. Obviously, the 150 units that we're limited to by the single point of access, we can't get an emergency access in. So again, we're in line with the Warwickshire Design Guide in terms of 150. That's below that 170 threshold. Now, we have run that through the S-Paramix model. Warwickshire County Council have looked at it there. Paramix team have looked at it. Vectos, who are the approved consultants who run that as a third party, have looked at that. And there is no requirement for this scheme in terms of the 150 units being considered tonight to improve, so to provide that 444 slip road as shown at the IP. But I think there was a specific question at the IP from the inspector, was what that number was, and I think at the time it was 170, and we are obviously below that in terms of the 150. And the model, just to jump in, sorry again, the modelling work that we did do throughout this application has assumed that 444 scheme is not in place. So all the scheme and the impact of our scheme assumes that's not there. We don't get the benefits of it, we don't rely on it, and therefore the scheme has been judged on what's in place and being delivered.
okay, thank you. Any other points of clarification? No? Okay. I don't know if you've got any comeback at all or anything you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, just to add that I agree with what James has said. So the A444 slip road is included as part of one of the requirements for the overall HSG4 allocation, but that's looking at the entire allocation and the full capacity for the maximum number of units. The A444 slip road would obviously be on the other side of the Woodlands Road and the Woodlands Lane as well, which isn't part of, you've got the Woodlands Road and the Woodlands Lane in between the two parcels. This application's on one half and the A444 slip road would be on the other half. And this application itself falls below the trigger to need the A444 slip road, and that's why County Highways have been able to remove their objection to this number of units.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to our next speaker, and that's Mr. Joseph Cramphorn, who I believe is the agent.
Thank you, Chair. I am Joseph Cramphorn, planning agent for the applicant. So housing proposed on the site is located within allocation HSG4 Woodlands of the adopted Borough Plan. Legislation states that the planning applications should be determined in accordance with the adopted development plan unless material considerations dictate otherwise. The fact that officers have recommended the application for approval suggests that they are content that no such material considerations exist to divert from the development plan. In this context, policies of the emerging Borough Plan review have limited weight, as is correctly stated in the committee report. The application being considered by committee tonight is outline in nature. Detailed matters related to appearance and layout, for example, will be the subject of future application. The applicant is currently in advanced discussions with Taylor Wimpey to bring forward the site, bolstering the borough's housing supply going forward, which is currently very close to the 4-year minimum requirement, and as has been suggested by the appellant in the current Weddington Road appeal case, it could be as low as 2.85 years. In response to the public comments raised in the committee report, it should be noted that In relation to highways, there is no objection from Warwickshire County Council. In relation to flood risk and drainage, there are no objections from Warwickshire County Council or Severn Trent Water, and no comment has been received from the Environment Agency. The current proposals are based on high-level design and are worked to a worst-case scenario. The drainage design is such that it prevents future flooding and, in fact, reduces overall effects of flooding due to the removal of the development site as a contributing area. Attenuation ponds are designed to hold up to a 1 in 1,000 year flood risk. A productive process of dialogue has taken place with officers, and the scheme has been amended to take on the comments raised. The proposals meet all planning policy tests and should therefore be approved. In addition, there are considerable benefits to be derived from the proposals, which include the increase in employment opportunities directly through jobs created on site during construction and indirectly through additional expenditure in local shops. Additional public foot and cycle paths being proposed as part of the scheme, increasing public access to green spaces, and a 25% affordable housing provision on site. The application will not increase the risk of flooding, and the development of the will enhance native hedge planting and shrub planting, which not only provides social value but also increases ecological diversity. Therefore, in accordance with statutory requirements, planning acts and government policy, planning permission should be granted. I commend the application to you for approval and thank you for the opportunity to address the committee tonight.
Thank you, Mr Cramphorn. I will ask, do any members seek any points of clarification? Okay, I'm not seeing anyone indicating. So I'll move on to our last speaker on this item, and that's Councillor Martin Walsh, who's the ward councillor. Councillor Walsh.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the committee,
Is it on? Sorry.
Members of the committee, as the ward councillor for Slough, within which the Woodlands Farm development sits, I am here to support the residents in the Woodlands area and also the residents of Bedworth and the surrounding areas in objecting to this application. I am surprised and disappointed that the planning officer has recommended approval. It was only a few months ago that I spoke, together with others, at the Planning Inspectorate's appeal hearing regarding a far smaller application, a mere 200 metres from this one, where the inspector upheld the NBBC's decision to refuse this application. The main reason for objecting the application, for me, remains the same as the other application that was rejected for 30 homes, not 150. I'm aware that my fellow ward councillor, Councillor Evans, has made contact with you via email with details of why the inspector upheld the decision to reject the other application. But I would like to draw your attention to what I consider to be the main reasons to refuse this application. As anyone knows, who knows the area, will tell you that the Woodlands Road, Woodlands Lane, the surrounding fields and all the way to the Nook floods on a regular basis. And you'll have probably seen for yourselves or in the photos presented by local residents making Woodlands Lane impassable beyond Dove Close. If this application is approved, then the building of 150 houses will only exacerbate the problem further. Next, with the building of another 150 houses on the Woodlands Lane, bringing with them at least 150 cars, and this is being conservative, which will make an average of a minimum of 2 journeys a day. The increase in traffic volume will cause untold problems on a road that at the best of times becomes regularly congested, not to mention totally backed up from the junction of Newtown Road during rush hours. Woodlands Road is not only used by its own local residents, but by numerous vehicles from the west of Nuneaton and further afield, travelling to work, school in Bedworth and beyond. With regards to what is considered to be a local centre, i.e. a range of shops, that states in our policy TC3 should be within 1,200 metres. The entrance to the site is in excess of 1,600 metres, that being the shops, etc. at the corner of Smorrel Lane and Heath Road. Junior and infant schools are well over a mile away, which would mean a walk of at least 30 minutes or a further car journey. Lastly, given that the plot of land HSG4 has been removed from the new borough plan, which is in the hands of the Secretary of State as we speak. Sorry. In the hands of the Secretary of State, as it was not required, and we would like sufficient land to fulfil our 5-year building plan. It should be considered as an emergency policy. So given these points, I would ask you to reject this application. I thank you for your time and your attention.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. Do any members have any points of clarification? Okay, I'm not seeing anyone indicating. In that case, we will move then to the motion in front of us, which is to recommend to grant planning permission subject to legal agreements and conditions as printed. So to enable discussion, do I have a proposer and a seconder for that? So thank you, Councillor Green and Councillor Smith. Okay, so if you're happy to propose and second. Okay, I'll open the floor to any members. Okay, Councillor Cape.
I'm not a resident of Bedworth, but I have travelled along that lane, or tried to, about a month ago when it was flooded and I couldn't get past and I was caught up in the traffic jams that you're on about. But my question is mainly to the officers, because I'm getting some conflicting data here. I'm being assured it's 1,600 metres, but in the report it says 1,200. Can I just ask, how is that measure calculated? Is it from the middle of the housing estate or the furthest north of the housing estate to the first line of the shop? Or is it to the middle of the shops? Or is it to the end of the shop? So how is that 1,200 calculation achieved?
So the way that I calculated it was I used various routes through, like existing streets, and I placed those points to various points within the site. Obviously, we don't know what the exact layout of the proposed site would be, so I did various lines going to different corners of the site, and I just adjoined those to the closest part of the centre, because obviously the policy just says to the centre, but say if you were going to the middle of the centre, there wouldn't be too many more metres involved with that. But yeah, so I went along existing footpaths, existing public rights of way, existing roads, and then just kind of drew straight lines up throughout the site itself. It might be longer if you kind of did it just from the site access, going all the way down the Woodlands Road. But obviously with this being a larger site, it will have proposed new connections further down, which are closer to the centres.
Okay, so if I understood you correctly, you said it was to the first part of the shops.
Yeah, so I just did the lines to the closest part of either the Newtown Road or the Smorrell Lane ones.
So that possibly explains the difference between 1,200 and 1,600 metres,
yeah,
depending
on
where you take your end.
And if you measured straight from just the site access, obviously you've got to go around the Woodlands Road bend as well. But because of the scale of this site, you wouldn't have to go along that road. There'd be new paths and road networks and links up, say, Jug Close as part of this development.
Okay, any further questions, Councillor Cape, at this point in time? No? Okay, Councillor Markham.
Thank you, Chair. I have got major concerns regarding the Woodlands Road, the Heath Road junction. I appreciate that Highways have not submitted any objections to this application, but I am a resident, I live in the area, I use the road, and like others have said, you can't get out of that junction now, especially at peak times. And if Woodlands Lane is closed, as we all know it is regularly closed because of the flooding, also outlined by Miss Parker, there is no other way to get off that estate but to go to the Heath Road junction. And to add a conservative potential 150 vehicles to that queue will never work. I appreciate that the developers are going to paint a box on the road, but users already create their own box. It doesn't make any difference. The queue still doesn't get out. It is still congested. And I also don't think that anybody expects the contractors to build on the flood area. That's why they've gone to flood 1. But just because the houses don't flood, it doesn't stop Woodlands Lane from flooding. So until they can say that Woodlands Lane isn't going to flood, I'm afraid that I've got big concerns about the whole development. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Markham. Any other members? Okay, I'll take them in the order I've seen them. Councillor Hartshorn and then Councillor Hammersley.
Thank you, Chair. It does seem that one of the major bones of contention amongst fellow councillors is the Woodlands Lane itself. Would it be worth, depending on how the rest of the debate goes, potentially scheduling a site visit so we can see the conditions of the Woodlands Road lane?
We did have a site visit scheduled, but members refused and didn't want so. We're going to get this determined tonight, Councillor, so we're not having a site visit.
No worries.
Councillor Hammersley.
Thank you, Chair. I also live just over the road from that junction, and the traffic at peak time stretches from, if anybody knows Bedworth, from Park Road to Smorrel Lane at peak times, and I can't get out my drive. So highways, I'm not sure how they arrived at their figures. I'm not sure how a yellow crosshatch keep clear will help with the situation, because you can't go anywhere anyway at peak times. I can't get off my drive, so I tend not to try and go anywhere at that peak times. I either go before or after. It is horrendous. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I have some questions, if I may, because I'm still weighing this up in my mind. The first question is about the appeal which has been raised by our speakers, and I remember the appeal that went to the inspector, and we won that for a number of reasons. I'd be interested to understand what officer's rationale is, because it does have material consideration, the inspector's decision, if I remember my planning training correctly. So what weight and what rationale have officers used from that decision by the inspector in coming to this conclusion? Because my layman's reading of it is that actually he wasn't very happy with the previous Woodlands application because of a lack of various different things. It'd be interesting to understand what the difference is with this one, and also the spectre of the 5-year, 4-year housing land supply has been raised by the applicants for the planning application before us. It's my understanding that we are paying not an insignificant sum for a King's Counsel to defend us at 3 appeals, where we are making a robust defence of our housing land supply, and where we are with that. What is the officer's position on that which they would be defending if this was to potentially go to appeal? I'm not commenting further. I may have some further points for debate, but those are some questions I have, Chair.
Okay, so just to kind of come back to your first question then. So with the Woodlands Road appeal, that site was further to the north of this site. So, you know, residents are correct in saying about the distance to local centres that was brought up. That site was outside of the settlement boundary as well, whereas this site is within the settlement boundary. The appeal site wasn't allocated for residential development, whereas this application currently is. The appeal site also had outstanding objections from the county flood risk team at the time of determination, which this application doesn't have. And with the appeal site, there were quite a lot of lack of demonstration reasons for refusal on there as well, so where the developer hadn't adequately shown that they could overcome policy points or met certain policies, whereas this is obviously a fresh, completely separate application where they've submitted the information that they need to. With regard to the 4-year supply, obviously our position at the minute is that we do meet that, but as part of the appeals that you're referring to the 3 ongoing ones, that is being challenged as part of that, which is what Joseph has referred to there. So that's constantly being scrutinised by the inspector. Our build rates and the progress that we've got with current applications is also a factor that weighs into our supply. So obviously that's constantly changing as well. So yeah, the position at the minute is that we do meet it. However, as I said, it's being challenged at the minute.
Just got a comment from our legal officer as well.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just in relation to the weight to be given to a different appeal, I mean, as your officer has indicated, there are some significant differences with that appeal. And this application itself does have technical data appended to it, which has been presented to you in your report. So I would ask you to pay attention to what's in your report. It's up to you to give whatever weight you wish to other matters, but your advice is that that application is sufficiently different to this application in its nature for you to give limited weight to the findings in that appeal. And the other element I just wanted to flag for members is that this is an allocation within a current local plan, which is again something that's a significant weight or a consideration of significant weight for you today, in that this application in principle terms is in accordance with the local plan that you're obliged to consider. Obviously there are other material considerations for you to weigh up. That is an important consideration that should be at the forefront of your mind when you're looking at this application today. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson, do you have any further questions?
No questions.
Yeah, absolutely. That's perfectly fine. Councillor Smith, you indicated you wish to speak.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Unusually, I find myself in disagreement with officers on quite a lot of this. In terms of the borough plan, I've just sat in about 3 weeks of appeal inquiries, listening to King's Counsel argue this point. And there is an argument about prematurity, which has been well debated. And taking that on board, my personal feeling is, well, if I can read from the MPPF at paragraph 49, arguments that an application is premature are unlikely to justify a refusal of planning permission other than in the limited circumstances where both the development proposed is substantial or its cumulative effect would be so significant that to grant permission would undermine the plan-making process by predetermining decisions about the scale, location or phasing of new development that are central to an emerging plan. And point 2 is the emerging plan is at an advanced stage but is not yet formally part of the development plan for the area. This is where I slightly disagree with the advice given, because at those inquiries, King's Counsel have made the point that we are at an advanced stage with our plan because it is in with the Secretary of State for determination. In fact, we should be in public examination hearings as soon as possibly early July. So I would argue that we actually meet those criteria laid out in paragraph 49 of the MPPF. And so on that basis, I would say prematurity is a valid reason to actually refuse this. Sustainability. We've heard a lot about policy TC3, and we've heard about the previous appeal hearing. I was at that hearing, and I did hear our speakers today give a very passionate account on both sustainability and on flood risk. And it did carry a lot of weight, more weight from the evidence they gave than the actual experts, I would say. And I saw the response from the inspector to those representations, And I would say the residents were actually quite right and are probably as capable of defending flood risk as the experts were. Our problem is that we don't have expert objections to this, and that does make it difficult. It also makes it difficult that if we refuse this, having recommended approval, our officers wouldn't really be able to represent a defence. So there would be a cost implication. We would have to employ an outside planning expert to defend any appeal. But I think there is a case on sustainability. I don't think this is within 1,200 metres of the local centre. I think that's a valid argument. It's certainly not in an easy walking distance to a local school. The chance of the second phase of this coming forward is pretty much nil. I don't think that is going to happen. And I think there's also an argument about biodiversity offsetting. There is a hierarchy to follow, which is avoid, minimise, restore, and only as a very last resort, offset. This site is very rich in biodiversity, and I think when developing a plan, they should retain as much of that on site as they can, but they're opting to put a lot of it off site in another area, and I don't think that does anything in placemaking or creating an environment that's good for the residents that will move there. So I think there's some work to do on that. Okay, they could overcome that, but I think it's a point worth raising. It's a very difficult balance for all those reasons. There are potential cost implications. Our officers wouldn't be able to defend an appeal. We would have to get an outside source, but I think it's worth the risk. So for me, I'm pretty much against this, and I'd be for refusing the application on those reasons. So prematurity, sustainability, biodiversity offsetting, and I think also the flood risk needs another look, so I would throw that into the mix as well. That's my feeling. And I know there'll be objections from the legal on that, but that's where I am with it.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, just to address the point about prematurity in paragraph 49 of the MPPF, it has been correctly set out by the member. What I would say, though, is that's written as if you don't have a current allocation. The difference with this situation is this site is allocated right now as you sit here. So it's not a case that it's not allocated and that there's an emerging local plan that may end up allocating and control some of these matters that are in front of you today. It's that you have a local plan that has allocated this site, and then you have another one that's effectively changing that allocation or may end up changing that allocation, but ultimately you don't actually know where that discussion will go. So I will maintain my advice, but ultimately it is for you members to consider what weight you want to give to the emerging local plan. But the advice from officers is that the emerging local plan is of limited weight because it hasn't been in front of an examination yet. And in relation to this particular application, you do have an allocation that in a current local plan that you're obliged by the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act and the Town and Country Planning Act to have regard to. And I'll just repeat paragraph 38.6 of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act, which says, if regard is to be had to a development plan for the purpose of any determination to be made under the Planning Acts, the determination must be made in accordance with the plan unless material considerations dictate otherwise. Obviously, we do have other material considerations here, but the point stands that this is an allocated site, and that is something that you must have significant regard to tonight. Sorry, this evening. Thank you.
Claire's just going to come in and add to that.
Yeah, it's just to echo what Jazz has said, really, and to bear in mind Councillor Smith referenced paragraph 49 of the MPPF, but it's important to note that those 2 points in that paragraph need to be met And as officers, we feel that at least one of them isn't met in terms of the cumulative and significant impact, and we're comparing other applications. But and to take on board what Jazz has said, it is part of an allocated site in an adopted borough plan. And also to pick up on the points about flooding, highway safety, without technical objections from those experts, it is very difficult for the council to defend those reasons. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I've sat here and listened very carefully to the debate because I think my history on planning applications such as this speaks for itself, that I've tried to support the little man over the big corporations where I can, and my own ward has been adversely impacted over the years, and unfortunately this isn't my first time at the rodeo. I've seen it time and time again, both when we were going through the last borough plan and when we were told that the old local plan from 1996 was out of date, and that you have to give according weight to it according to that. And it's very interesting that the legal advice that we're given is about weight, and it's quite correct, but it's a subjective test to an extent about what we as planning members consider that weight to be. Now, I think as planning members we have to be seen to be reasonable before the inspector if this is the way it goes. I think trying to put something in where there is a lack of evidence, as much as I might agree with Councillor Markham about highways and Councillor Hammersley, again, I had that battle myself in Whitestone with highways, knowing as a local member and a local resident the impact it would have on the local network, and the fact that Lutterworth Road is described as the busiest road in the borough at key times. That was discounted because the county didn't back us up as a reason for refusal. So if we try and throw that into the mix, we'll be found to be unreasonable and have costs awarded against us. If we try and throw flooding in, and I can understand the temptation to do so, having been down there myself, again, if we don't have the technical wherewithal to defend that, again, we'd be unreasonable. So I wouldn't agree with those reasons as much as I would support them as an individual, a layman, as it were. But there are some arguments in there that I think do bear closer scrutiny and examination. So, first of all, I get fed up time after time of various applicants, and I know why they do it, try and scare planning committees about the lack or otherwise of a housing land supply, and hope that it will bring a planning committee to heel. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. I've been here long enough to see both sides of the equation. But for as much as I'm aware, it is our contention as a council we have a 5-year housing land supply, and until the inspector rules otherwise, that is the position I will take. So I won't be scared into submission on that one. In terms of the advanced nature of the review, I think there is some merit in that. It is about weight, and I understand that you say that you have to have significant changes in that, and I think there are some significant changes compared to 2019, in the fact that the inspector in his report in 2019 said that a lot of the data was borderline being out of date, and that we had to do, in his words, a review by 2021. That review was not done by 2021, we're now in 2024. So that data, by definition, must be further out of date than it was when the inspector originally considered that the woodlands and everything else was sound. We now have, thanks to the planning team, a new raft of up-to-date information which we are putting in as part of our submission for the changes to the borough plan. And I think that now has more weight, or I'm prepared to give that more weight in my consideration, because we knew in 2019 what we had then was at the limits of its acceptability. So I would also give that more weight in this case, and the fact that we do have that housing land supply. I know from the figures I was given by officers, last year the council tax base went up by over 800 houses. Now that tells me that we are building out at a good rate, or would seem to me to be that we're building out at a good rate. So I think we are meeting the test that is being set out there, that we are doing what we need to. There is no under-delivery, so to speak, at the moment. I know you've got the whole Sedgefield, Liverpool, whatever test you've got to do, and that we have that coming forward. But I am prepared to give our new review more weight in my deliberation, because I think its data and its reasoning is far more up to date than what was approved in 2019. And the inspector said in black and white that it needed to be reviewed by 2021, and we are already overdue. Through no fault of the new administration's own, that's what we inherited. But we are where we are. So also, when I'm looking at being reasonable, and I can understand the officer's point of view about different points where you measure things and the access, but we have a policy for a reason, and I think it is reasonable to assume, based on the fact that there isn't this great modal shift that everyone keeps talking about to walking or biking, only a limited proportion of people will use the new alleyways and jitties, etc., to get there. The vast majority of people will use that one single point of access we're told about, which is over 1,600 metres away and is not in accordance with our policy. So to me, it is reasonable to assume that because there is that single point of vehicular access, most people will use that, and therefore it does not accord with our policy. For those reasons, Chair, I will vote against tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Do any other members wish to come in? Councillor Cape.
It was just to go back to the distance again, which is why I asked the question originally, and I've listened to others discuss it. For me, in the terms of reasonableness, it's not any of the major issues such as prematurity that I would be making my decision on. It's lots of small, niggling concerns which haven't been fully addressed in this report. The biodiversity was one I was going to raise. I've never liked the idea of biodiversity offsetting outside of a site unless it's absolutely essential. So I can't see why it's absolutely essential. The non-building of the hub and the distance walking to the shops. And in fact, whether or not doctors' surgeries that are there will take another 300 people or not. The Parks Department were not sure that it would meet all their requirements, yet that wasn't given a huge amount of weight. The element on the sewers and the fact that Severn Trent will have to do some major research and work before any of the houses could be occupied was also not, to my satisfaction, covered. And last but by no means least, even though the Victorian Society complaint was not given a great deal of weight, for me that is another small factor which builds up for me a picture of uncertainty, and I don't feel comfortable about it. So I'm not inclined to support the motion.
Okay, thank you. Do I have any other members who wish to come in? Okay, so I mean, I've listened to everything that's been said, and for what it's worth, for my comments, I have to agree with pretty much all the previous speakers. There's nothing I can add to what I've heard, other than that, you know, what we do have is we've created a watertight emerging plan, you know, and I've often said at borough planning meetings that, you know, what we've created is a Rolls Royce. And I think that's what it is. It's a high-end, high specification, and I think it is robust enough that if we go down the line of refusal, that will stand the test, and it's far enough along that perhaps prematurity will be a part of it. Equally, I agree with the comments regarding TC3, you know, and the distances. I think that, you know, if it had been the other way round, we would have thrown it out. And I don't see that the developers deserve special treatment because it's them that's trying to push this through, and it's in the borough plan. And I know if it had been the opposite way round, you know, and somebody out and the residents were asking for something like that, and they fell short, they would be given short shrift to that as well, and quite rightly so as well. Again, biodiversity offsetting, yeah, why that couldn't have been done on site. Again, it's a niggly thing, along with sort of like the parks officers as well. That doesn't sit well with me. And then I think the local experience of residents as well on the flood risk, I think that is a concern. And just because there is no modelling done, I mean, I'm sure residents have, as you say, logged what's been going on. And yeah, that is in itself a form of evidence. It may not be the form of evidence they would like, but we can't ignore it. It is happening. It is real. And we're going to add that problem. I can't see how it's being mitigated against here. It's insufficient. So for that reason, I'm going to find it very difficult to vote to recommend this. So one last call. Any other speakers on this matter? No, okay, in that case, I'll go to the vote. So in front of us, we have a recommendation to grant planning permission subject to a legal agreement and the conditions printed. All those in favour? Against? Okay, so that is carried unanimously. Okay, so as that's carried unanimously, we now need to look at the reasons for why we've objected. Pardon? Yeah, we'll need to move a new motion to that. So does anybody wish to propose a motion? Councillor Smith.
I'll make a start on it. So I'd like to raise a motion that we refuse planning permission based on the issues of prematurity, sustainability and biodiversity offsetting. I'll see what anybody else says. I think flood risk is a real issue for me, but I'm not sure if we feel safe in putting that in there as a reason.
Does any other member wish to come in on that? I'll second it. Okay, you'll second it. Thank you, Councillor Wilson. So any other members, any comments on what's been proposed by Councillor Smith? So in front of us, it's to refuse planning permission based on issues of prematurity, sustainability and biodiversity. Okay. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask that as part of this, that officers, and I know it will be recorded, but they take into account the points of debate that were raised about, the outdatedness of the local plan, the inspectors' comments from 2019 that it should be reviewed by 2021, the fact that we now have more up-to-date evidence, that we do believe that we have that 5-year housing land supply, which we are defending. So you'll have all that weight of evidence behind you that you're using for the current 3 appeals. I'm just trying to make sure that we cover all those bases, Chair.
And I think within that as well, to specifically state policy TC3 as well, just so we're sort of clear, so if we could add that to the statement as well. So refuse planning permission based on the issues of prematurity, sustainability, including TC3 and biodiversity. Does that sound like a motion members are happy with? I'll just sort of see nods. Is there anyone thinks anything else they would like to add? Or they wish to challenge even? No? Okay, then we'll put that to the vote in that case. So all those in favour of that motion? Okay, so that is carried unanimously. Thank you. That's the end of item 1. So we'll take a 5-minute break for those that wish to now vacate, and we'll reconvene at 25 past. Okay, I make it 25 minutes past. I think we've got everyone back in the room, so we will now resume the meeting, and I'll ask Rebecca to go on to our second item. So whenever you're ready, Rebecca.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Our second item is a full planning application for the erection of 14 residential apartments at Burgage Walk in Nuneaton to the rear of Abbey Street. The application site is currently used as a private surface-level car park for an existing commercial unit in close proximity to the site. As such, the site consists of hard standing and is relatively flat. A previous application was approved in 2018 for the erection of 12 apartments. The foundations were dug, and as such, this permission has technically been implemented and hence remains extant. The previous permission could be used as a fallback option and therefore is a material planning consideration in the determination of this case. The key issues to consider in the assessment of this application are the principle of development, affordable housing and housing mix, visual amenity and landscape character, residential amenity, contamination, air quality, noise and odour, heritage and archaeology, impact to trees, open space and ecology, highway safety and accessibility, flooding and drainage and planning obligations. As the site is within the town centre, it is extremely well connected to a good range of local facilities and services that can be accessed by foot and other sustainable means of transport. As such, the site is considered to be in a highly sustainable location and is also within the defined settlement boundary. The NPPF states that decisions should give substantial weight to the value of using suitable brownfield land within settlements for homes. The site is within the settlement boundary, and as a previous developed site, it is considered to be brownfield land. As per the NPPF, these factors are considered to carry substantial weight in support of the application. Policy TC3 identifies Nuneaton as the principal town within the borough and includes residential as an appropriate use type. Policy TC2 states that proposals for the loss of retail units to non-retail uses on the ground level in the defined primary shopping frontage will not be permitted. The site is outside of the primary and secondary shopping frontage areas, and therefore the change of use at the ground floor is considered to be acceptable and appropriate within this location. Policy BE3 requires 35% of new dwellings to be M42 compliant. M42 is a building regulations standard, which means that dwellings are accessible and adaptable for people with disabilities. 35% of 14 is 4.9, and the 4 ground floor units would meet the M42 standard. This is a shortfall of 1 unit. However, given the town centre location and that these are flats with no lift facilities, this shortfall is considered to carry minor weight against the application. The principle of residential development has also been established as part of the previous permission. Policy H2 of the Borough Plan states that the Council will seek to negotiate 2 affordable housing units where residential development proposals consist of between 11 and 14 dwellings. The Council's housing team requested 2 units. However, the scheme has been demonstrated to be unviable should affordable housing and/or Section 106 contributions be provided. The scheme would provide 14 one-bed apartments. Whilst this does not specifically accord with the HEDNA, given the town centre location, it is realistic to assume that the units are likely to be occupied by young professionals, couples and potentially the elderly. It is not uncommon for town centre dwellings to be predominantly 1 and 2 bedrooms, and the housing team have no objection to the proposal. As such, the proposed mix is considered acceptable given the site location and circumstances. The proposal would see the redevelopment of a car park within the town centre. This is an urban area surrounded by other 2 to 4 storey built developments, and therefore the impact to the landscape character is considered to be acceptable. The design is fairly modern with a mixture of red brick and cream render. Doors and windows appear to be grey UPVC, and the building features a mostly flat roof. The site is visible from Corporation Street and is adjacent to a 4-storey red brick building and 2-storey red brick building. Contrasting brick coursing lines have been also included to add visual interest, and samples of materials to be used within external parts of the building have been requested via condition. The site is located towards the rear of Abbey Street, and there are existing units on Abbey Street which are predominantly commercial, business and service units at the ground floor, with residential at the first and second floors. Certain units on Abbey Street also feature bedrooms or other habitable rooms within the roof. The height, location and scale of the building hereby proposed is very similar to that previously approved under the previous application. All rear south-facing windows within the previous application were conditioned to be obscure, glazed and non-opening below 1.7 metres, and this is also the case within this application. The minimum separation standards are largely met, with slight shortfalls addressed within the agenda. All apartments exceed the nationally described space standards, and all habitable rooms feature at least one window. The positioning and layout of this proposal is very similar to the previously approved application, and therefore the impact to neighbours and future owners and occupiers would also be similar and has already been deemed as acceptable. The site is outside of the Coal Authority's high-risk development zone, and the Environmental Health Team have raised no objection with regard to contamination or land stability. As such, the impact is considered to be acceptable. The Council's Environmental Health Team were consulted with as part of the previous application and as part of this application. Within the previous application, Environmental Health had several concerns around noise pollution, as the apartments are surrounded by commercial and industrial premises. To the front, there are industrial, commercial and distribution units on Corporation Street. To the east is a scrap metal yard, and to the south and west are the service areas for the commercial uses on Abbey Street. Noise arising from these sources may include delivery noise, plant noise, noise from general operations, and clangs and bangs from the scrap metal yard. In addition to noise issues, there are extraction flues serving food premises on Abbey Street, which, given their height, could cause odour problems to the flats. Consequently, Environmental Health requested a noise impact assessment and an odour risk assessment for the previous application. Both of these reports had been submitted and assessed by Environmental Health. Following on from this, the previous application was approved, subject to conditions to request details of a building ventilation system and noise attenuation scheme. Environmental Health have stated that they're satisfied with a similar approach for this planning application and therefore have no objections, subject to conditions. An archaeological evaluation has been submitted, and the Council has consulted with the County Archaeology team. No response has been received to this application. However, within the previous application, it was stated that there is potential for the proposal to encounter locally important deposits. As such, a pre-commencement condition was attached to the previous permission to request a written scheme of investigation and a mitigation strategy. This condition was discharged as part of the previous application, and excavations were dug in order to implement the previous permission. Given that this condition was discharged as part of the previous application and foundations were previously dug, along with the lack of response from County Archaeology to this scheme, it is considered that the condition is not necessary for this application and that they have no objection. The proposal would result in a significant increase in biodiversity units given the very low baseline value. There are no on-site trees that would be worthy of retention as part of the proposal, and the tree officer raises no objection. Whilst the Open Space and Green Infrastructure SPD requests the inclusion of public open space for major residential applications, it is not considered appropriate to request the inclusion of public open space on this site, given its constraints, close proximity to town centre parks, and because the previously approved scheme did not include public open space. The lack of on-site play and open space forms the basis of the park's objection, and they've also requested contributions towards the maintenance and improvement of other existing play and open space land. The proposed development would remove all the parking spaces from the current car park, and parking wouldn't be provided for the new residential use. The Highway Authority considers the application site to be in a sustainable location within the town centre and in a reasonable walking distance of well-served public transport facilities, off-site car parking and other town centre services and facilities, and it is considered that the spaces lost as part of this development could be absorbed within the other town centre parking facilities. Although the roads surrounding the site are subject to a comprehensive array of parking restrictions, the Highway Authority considers that any additional parking demand that may result from the development is unlikely to lead to a material detriment to the safe and efficient operation of the highway, and raises no objection to the proposal. The site is wholly located within Flood Zone 1, and this is considered to be the most appropriate zone for residential development. The County Flood Trust team have no objections subject to conditions, as the application has demonstrated acceptable drainage and runoff management, and this includes the use of cellular attenuation tanks, hydro planters and flow control chambers. A financial viability assessment has been submitted as part of the application to demonstrate that the development cannot support any planning obligations, including the provision of affordable housing, and this is the reason that this application is being presented to committee. The assessment has been independently assessed by a property and regeneration consultant who has concluded that the scheme is unviable and cannot viably meet the required level of affordable housing and Section 106 contributions. The NPPF states that it is up to the applicant to demonstrate whether particular circumstances justify the need for a viability assessment at the application stage. The weight to be given to a viability assessment is a matter for the decision maker, having regard to all the circumstances in the case, including whether the plan and viability evidence underpinning it is up to date, and any change in site circumstances since the plan was brought into force. As stated, the viability assessment has been scrutinised by an independent consultant who agrees that the development would be unviable for the applicant to pay any requested planning obligations in this case. The lack of Section 106 contributions must be balanced against other positive parts of the scheme, and including the viability of the scheme. It would provide a beneficial use of brownfield land, provide investment in the town centre, and assist with supporting the council's housing supply. The scheme provides much needed housing and would be a car-free development, encouraging the use of sustainable travel. It is considered that the merits of the case contribute towards the regeneration of the town centre, and these combined would outweigh the lack of contributions. Notwithstanding this, market conditions can quickly change, and therefore it is recommended to include a review mechanism within the Section 106 agreement to consider the scheme's actual sales values and incurred costs. This will allow the council to benefit from any significant uplifts in viability resulting from any cost engineering or improvement to the sales market by the time the units come to the market. The applicant agrees to the late stage review, and the finer details of this could be agreed as part of the Section 106 process, should committee vote to approve. Subject to the late stage review and the conditions printed within the agenda, the recommendation is one of approval. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Rebecca. I don't have any speakers on this item, so we'll move straight to discussion, provided, of course, we can get somebody to put it forward and then someone to second it. So in front of us then we've got an application to grant planning permission subject to legal agreement and conditions as printed. Do I have a proposer, Councillor Smith, and do I have a second, Councillor Wilson? Thank you. Do any members have any comments they wish to make? Councillor Markham.
It's just a question, actually, for the officers. They may be able to answer. The independent consultant, with regard to them not being viable for them to pay the 106 contributions, is that one of our independent consultants, or is it one that the applicant has got for themselves?
So we appointed that consultant. The applicant pays the council back for it, but we approach them and they provide the response back to us.
Okay, any other members? No? Okay, so in that case, I should go to the vote. All those in favour of the recommendation to approve? Okay, against? Abstentions? Okay, so one abstention. Okay, so that is passed. Okay, we'll move on to item 3. I think we're going to have a quick change around in officer now. Now that we've worn Rebecca out for the evening. Thank you, Maria. I've got one speaker on this item, that's Councillor Condacor, who I believe is speaking in objection. So, Councillor Condacor, I think you know the drill.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not objecting to the whole proposal. The bit I've got a problem with is the library, which is 20% of the site. And if the library bit was considered as a freestanding planning application, demolishing a library and putting some housing on the site would seem rather a backward step when actually that building can have community use. We've heard this development is effectively a basket case financially. Obviously, the County Council want to do it for regeneration purposes, but in terms of the housing, they're actually not going to be actually profit-making to build them. So it would make eminent sense, actually, to take the library, the existing library, out of this development proposal, develop the rest of the site, build a new library, build the vast majority of the housing, and then retain the library for some community use, health centre. The new town centre is already fully booked up. So to get rid of the library just seems totally mad when to build a new building of that quality costs a fortune. In the officer's report, it clearly points out that there's a significant case against demolishing the library. So I would ask the committee to find some way of deferring the library bit of this development to see what can be done and approving the rest of the scheme. Because the library's clearly got to be the very last phase, because you can't build the library until the new library is built and fully operational. So we're talking about 3-4 years before the library will get built on. And it really, really doesn't make sense with the embedded energy in that building and its massive opportunity for community use, either for art gallery, health screening. There's so many things we'd use that building for. The housing is providing zero Section 106 money. It can't afford to provide any community facilities. So why not just build 10 houses less and keep the library? It seems an eminently sensible thing to do. And I ask the Council to consider what ways it can do that whilst enabling the larger regeneration scheme. The other 2 points I'd like to make. One, the Wheat Street entrance has been cancelled, and that entrance area obviously provides some more land that could be used for housing if you haven't got a new road coming in. And I'm really disappointed the title of the application has been changed on the day of the Planning Committee. And I'm not sure how legal that is. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Condacor. Does any members have any points of clarification they wish to seek from Councillor Condacor? I'm not seeing any hands raised. So in that case, we'll move to recommendation, which is to grant planning permission subject to legal agreements and conditions as printed. Do I have a proposer and a seconder? Councillor Markham and Councillor Smith. Thank you. Okay, I'll move to the debate. Do any members have any anything they wish to say or any questions? Yes, Councillor Hartsell.
Thank you, Chair. I used to work at that building that is currently standing. I do understand Councillor Condacor's points about it could potentially be used for those facilities, but the building itself is in a sorry state of repair. It turns itself into flood zone 3 and a light shower, unfortunately, and that's the inside of the building. If it were to stay, it would have to undergo major renovations, potentially running into the millions of pounds. If the site is already unviable for Section 106 as it currently stands, then I don't think the County Council would be willing to spend the money to essentially fix every single thing wrong with that building. And it is sorely needed. The new one is, you know, the current library has, as a former employee, reached its maximum potential, I think. Having worked there for nearly 10 years, I've seen the changes it's gone through. Great changes, but it's reached the end. It needs the room to expand. It needs a new building. It needs new opportunities. I'm not 100% happy that the houses are planned for that, but looking at it on balance, in order to allow the project to go forward, I will vote in favour of it.
Thank you, Councillor Hartsell. Do I have any other members? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I think we have to remember that when we're considering planning applications, we have to consider them as they are, not what we would like. I might like various different things on there, but that isn't what is before me. I have to consider the recommendations as printed. And throughout the years, I've heard various reports about the state of the fabric of the building itself, and I think Councillor Hartshorn has just borne some of those out. It would cost significant amounts of money to invest into a building which is past its usefulness to an extent, because it was built in the 1950s, 1960s for a completely different era, and we now need to have different facilities because people's habits have changed. What we do in libraries is completely different now compared to what they did back in the 50s and 60s. Now, if you read your history about the site, it was actually part of a wider civic centre that was designated for that area. So you would have not only the library, but you would have the courts and the police station. Well, the courts have long gone, the police station has long gone, and the old job centre is also long gone. And these are all large brownfield sites which have sat there derelict for almost 15, coming up for 20 years. Is that something we really want to be the first site that people see of our town centre if we are trying to encourage that investment in to do these things? And you can argue the rights or wrongs of housing on this site, but it helps facilitate getting the brownfield regeneration that we desperately need. It helps with the sales to facilitate the viability, because I think the gap would be even wider without these. And let's not forget, a lot of us around here have stood on platforms at various different times about prioritising brownfield building first, not on using greenfield and greenbelt sites. This is a prime example, Chair, of a brownfield first approach, and actually delivers not only an economic good but a social good as well, which I think significantly weighs in its favour. I know that there are people who have various arguments about the heritage of the site, about whether it's worthy of preservation or not. I'm sure that officers received a number of representations on that. I know it's an emotive subject for residents, but I'm sure when they move the library from its previous location to where it is now, we've still got the buildings in the town centre, because they were actually lovely and built to last. I think I'm probably in the camp that thinks this is a 1960s concrete carbuncle. There are some who think it is a fine example of its day, and it was built by the architect of Liverpool Cathedral. It's not Liverpool, and it's not Liverpool Cathedral. As much as I would love it to be, I have to deal with what we have now in the 21st century, which is what our residents need now. So I think this is a fantastic opportunity, and it meets all of our planning requirements, so we should approve it tonight so that we can actually get the regeneration going, because that's what residents want, not more faffing around, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Any other members? Okay, I'm not seeing anyone indicating that they wish to speak, so I'll move to the vote then. All in favour of the recommendation as printed before us? Okay, so that is carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, that brings us on to our final item of the evening. So, Maria, whenever you are ready. Okay, thank you. So we have a recommendation then to add prematurity as a further reason for refusal. So do I have a proposer and a seconder to enable debate? Thank you, Councillor Cape. Sorry. Oh, sorry, my apologies, Councillor Conticle. Yes, you are on the list to speak. My apologies for that. Carry on.
Thank you. My last ever time here speaking as a
How
councillor.
can we forget your last ever time as a councillor?
And I'm down as an objector, but actually I'm not objecting to what the officers are proposing. So I'm down as should be the ward councillor. And I think it's very important to understand that the borough plan and plan making isn't just about housing numbers, it's about infrastructure. And if developers keep tacking on more and more housing to the top of Nuneaton, we already have 2 sites on Hyme Lane on the opposite side, which are in excess of what was in the borough plan. We get a more and more top-heavy borough and more serious environmental and social problems with the transport issues particularly, but not just transport, we've got the health, etc. So I fully support the idea of prematurity, and this is a crazy planning application. They want to put a new roundabout on the A5. You can't put a T-junction on the A5 in less than about 10 years, as we've found out with the Midland Heart homes that are still unoccupied after 2 years. So I can't see how this application could ever be built within a time that would mean it is urgent to do. Building a new roundabout without the Highways England, or whatever they're called this week, wanting a new roundabout built, it's just hard. I can't see how they're going to force through an extra roundabout on the A5 if Highways England or National Highways don't want them to build one. And then to blame us for saying this is premature seems absolutely bizarre. So I fully support we add prematurity. I really want the infrastructure in. And in some bizarre case that this got approved, I'd really want a new station entrance on the Wenton side, cycle lanes, so much stuff to actually try and get 700 houses worth of people into town without wrecking all the stuff. It would make it unviable. So, yeah, I support the officers on this, and I do ask we start looking at the transport stuff and not just talking about housing numbers, because we're so overloaded in the north of the borough with all this housing, all coming down to that little mini roundabout outside Lidl's, or the Eton Gyratory. Yeah, we're already overbuilt. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Conticle. I mean, unfortunately, we can only discuss what's put in front of us, which is obviously tonight the prematurity side of it. So, Councillor Cape, I believe are you still happy to propose? Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Okay, so any members wishing to speak? No, I'm not seeing anyone indicating, so I shall move to the vote in that case. All those in favour of adding prematurity as a further reason for refusal? Okay, and that is carried unanimously. Okay, so that brings to a close then our meeting. I'd like to thank all members of the public, councillors, members of the Planning Application Committee and officers for their attendance this evening. Thank you.